Attention, all curious minds, innovators, and trendsetters. It's time to pause, lean in, and get ready for an extraordinary journey as we dive deep into the fascinating realms of life, technology, entertainment, and business. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Brace yourselves, for the next thrilling episodes of Hipther Talks is about to take off. Counting down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we go.
Hi everyone, Zoltan here. We're back again. It's at Hipther Talks, and we are sticking to the gaming industry this time. And I have the pleasure of having with me the one and only Martin Lycka. Martin, nice to have you here.
The pleasure is entirely mine. Thanks for having me, Zoltan.
Like I said a while ago, it's very interesting that we are already at the 4th season with our podcast, and we have all these awesome friends who we did not invite as guests. So yeah, now it's high time we do so and get back with having some of our friends on our show. So Martin, we have this tradition here that we like to give the opportunity for our guests to say a few words about themselves. In their own words, without us reading the bios. So, Martin, tell our audience who they're dealing with today.
Oh, right now, I've come back from my school run. I presume the audience may not want to hear that much about that, but if I may stick to that theme, because I'm at least trying to be big on family. So I'm Czech by origin, British on paper. I lived in London for 12 years. Before moving to the East Coast. And it's really flying by because we've been in the New York metropolitan area for nearly 4 years. By now, I happen to be married to, I use your expression if I may, one and only, absolutely great Brazilian lady. And we have a British daughter and we have an American daughter. So it's all very cosmopolitan. So that's on the personal side of the house. Besides that, it's been a privilege, it has, and a pleasure to have been in the gambling industry for nearly 16 years. So I started back in 2009 with Betfair, when they were still called Betfair, was part of the Flutter Group these days. And most recently, after having spanned nearly 8 years with Betfair and subsequently Paddy Power Betfair, to be fair, if you pardon the pun, I've done some 7 years with Entain, mainly, and that's the final point, I promise, looking after the likes of government and regulatory affairs, responsible gambling, sports integrity, licensing, but also charitable partnerships, some of which, or pretty much all of which, have become very close to my heart. So thanks again for the opportunity to chat with you today.
It's our pleasure to having you here. And yeah, this brings back memories because 2014, I was in Bulgaria and Sofia at the Eastern European Gaming Summit. It was my first time I ever been on stage to moderate a panel, and you were in it. I remember when we were speaking about the Eastern, yeah, you were representing Betfair, Bwin, something. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope I wasn't giving you a hard time because that conference, I strongly believe, would have been the first ever event that I had the pleasure of having attended and speaking.
All right, so it was for us both. It was the first time on stage.
Yeah, it might have been, or perhaps I might have done it a few years before you joined the industry and changed it forever for the better. But if I may, what I was going to say, because I believe once on our usual talks with BP3 and Jeremy Kleiman, you and the guys in the previous panel, you asked us the question how one prepares to come on stage and talk, and we had a little chat about that. But the moral of my story is that I still vividly recall having been on the panel for the first time, and I can guarantee you, to the extent this is smooth today, it would have been by no means this smooth. So it's really, really a matter of practice. And then if you are privileged and fortunate enough to be invited back, like I am, by Hipther, then There's a lot of practice. Definitely, yeah. That particular event has a big place in my heart because I believe that's where I made my debut on one of the big stages.
All right, that's good to hear. So you lived in and worked across Europe, and now you are now calling the US as home. So what was the biggest cultural or regulatory shock when shifting from EU to the American gambling landscape?
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily call it a shock, but as a European, you tend to think that the likes of New York City or Washington, D.C., or perhaps some of the other cities on the East Coast, like Boston, my beloved Boston, my spiritual home, because I'm a Patriots and Bruins fan for my sins, that they represent, if not encapsulate, the United States of America. And there's nothing further from the truth. And I'm not going to get political. Let's not talk about the man in the White House and whatnot. We tend to do it with Pasquale and Kleiman anyway. But really, to get to know America, one has to travel around. I suppose the bottom line is, and that's been part of the culture shock, that the United States, the clue's in the name. It's what's written on the tin. There are individual states that differ from each other. So it's just, to some extent, a different planet living here on the East Coast and then going to good old middle or even out west, especially northwest. So if there's one message that I'd like to convey about the US is that culturally, it's genuinely 50 different states / places. And in a way, to come full circle and link it back to the EU or Europe, because lots of states out there, they're sovereign states, but they're also very different. So in that regard, actually, it hasn't been such a sea change. One final point. I lived in London, as I've said, for 12 years. My wife had lived there for some 18 years. And quite frankly, that has somewhat helped with the acclimatization and adjustments there. Of course, remember coming over, and it dawned on me the next morning that this is where we live. And at the risk of stating the obvious, and I happen to be in a Starbucks, this is not meant to be a Starbucks advert, of course, that I was in a Starbucks with she's now the older one, the little one back then. She was 1 year and a couple of days when we moved to the States. And as I started saying, it just dawned on me that from now onwards, this is where we live. And of course, huge difference between living somewhere and having to, luckily we didn't have to start from scratch, but you still have to go through a lot of bureaucracy and whatnot, everything you would have loved to have forgotten about, because in our case, we've done it in few jurisdictions by then. But really, it's this blend of having lived in an English-speaking country, so move into another one. So there are some cultural similarities, of course, but also that epiphany that now this is where we live and everything's just even bigger and even more spectacular.
All right. And what about the regulatory part of it?
Sorry, I was not trying to get off or go off the tangent.
It's no worries.
The regulatory part of it, yet again, there are similarities, but there are also key differences. At the risk of stating the obvious, and if that's what you'd like to do, Sultan, of course, we could also venture up north to Canada, down south to Brazil, Latin American jurisdictions. But here in the United States, as I'm sure your audience knows, in most jurisdictions, partnership with a land-based facility, be it a casino, a racetrack, or sports franchise is required. Of course, any such coupling or tethering would be at loggerheads with EU law. So there are some exceptions, arguably in breach of EU law, and it doesn't exist in Europe. So that would be my opening gambit. So all the businesses coming over here with an intention to offer sports betting or online gambling, because do need to partner with someone who is on the ground. That's the first point. And of course, for the sake of this argument, I'm somewhat shunting aside the whole debate around the Kalshis of this world and the sweepstakes, because those guys don't have partners. I'm sure that we could talk ad nauseum about the legality of some of those products. But in practical terms, I may give you a second part of my answer. What I've always really appreciated in the States and actually throughout the Americas is how religiously all the regulators, no exceptions, have stuck rather to their open door policy. Can come, knock on the regulator's door. Ideally, you give them a heads up, you're coming. That's always handy. And they're always prepared and even keen on having a chat, because you may end up agreeing to disagree. That is not guaranteed. But it's absolutely great to have this platform or individual platforms up and down the country that you can use as, for want of better expression, sounding boards or testing your ideas without pushing the envelope too much. Said that, just for the record, I'm by no means trying to say that it would have been that different in Europe, but at least from my experience, to get to this point in Europe had taken somewhat longer than it had in the United States. Because ultimately, I believe, and that is fact, that is a fact, this industry is still to some extent associated with tainted reputation. Yeah. So I appreciate that there are folks out there that are treading very, very carefully. But long story short, we've talked about the cultural and practical differences. On the regulatory side of things, the setup here in the US is somewhat different. But what I've really enjoyed and treasured is the very productive contact, very productive discussions with regulators and other decision makers.
All right. So I've for my next question, I stuck with Prague to New Jersey to LATAM because we have access. When we are creating the agendas for our conference, especially for our Prague summit, we started 2 years ago bringing speakers from the US, and now recently this year we also brought from LATAM. So basically we are covering all this, but from the outside perspective, like we're bringing the content for our participants, but you are in it. And this is why I'm interested about how do you personally stay grounded while also navigating so many regulatory ecosystems at once, like Europe, US, LATAM?
Well, I will get kicked if she ever gets to watch this talk, but I happen to live with 3 Brazilian ladies, of course, my wife and our 2 daughters that are half Brazilian. So that definitely keeps me grounded. Silly jokes aside, on a very serious note, I believe that the exposure, it may sound like a broken record, but the exposure to the individual cultures has definitely helped me throughout my career. So I framed it, or I kicked it off by saying that I'm Czech by origin, which I believe puts me in a decent position to interact with the likes of Hungarians, the Poles, the Romanians, that whole region. And then when I was some 26 years old, I got this great opportunity at Betfair, on the back of which I had the privilege and pleasure to have moved to London. Yeah. Now, and in the spirit of telling you stories, just a very short sidebar. I came over thinking, well, I speak some decent English, hit the first offie, as they call those little shops. I can guarantee you that I didn't understand a word of what they were saying. So you learn the hard way, and you learn by experience, and you're absorbing the culture. I've even learned to not necessarily love, but like cricket. That's a great icebreaker. And then juxtaposing all this on the US experience, I've always been a big fan of hockey and American football. I follow basketball, but baseball, not so much. These days, I'm an Atlanta Braves fan. I watch a game every now and then. I've been to a few games because perhaps even self-servingly, I hope this is not coming across as too cynical. You need, in my line of trade, you need something to talk to. So having these icebreakers up my sleeve is very, very useful. A final point on a serious note, what I would say to your question, looking at it with my gambling industry hat and goggles on, yes, jurisdictions are different. Politics are different. The frameworks, the ecosystems are different. But ultimately, when it comes to the regulation itself, the issues that crop up tend to be, if not identical, then very similar. What's the portfolio of permitted products? What are the restrictions? How do we go about advertising? What's the tax rate? Is there debate about international liquidity? Yes or no? What's the tax setup? So I believe that ultimately that kind of experience of having done this for the last nearly 16 years, and I'm by no means omniscient and I'm learning every day, I can guarantee you that helps. So it comes down to putting this into the cultural context, especially when dealing with decision makers, including politicians.
All right. So let's also touch base on Latin America, because you are many times, I mean, all the time speaking in the US market update session. But we never got to pick your brain about Latin America, because it's often described nowadays as the next frontier in iGaming and gambling. So from your point of view, what are the most exciting and most maybe misunderstood aspects of the market? Is it just Brazil, or are there any other markets as well that are to be conquered? Maybe we can say that.
I may be biased because, as I keep saying, I happen to be part of a Brazilian family, or as I would say in Portuguese, brasileiro de coração, Brazilian at heart. But it's not only Brazil, of course. Brazil is the economic heart, the engine behind the continent, the biggest country.
Yeah.
The most interesting opportunities are there. But then that would be unfair, let me put it that way, to the other great countries and jurisdictions that are potentially on offer down in Latin America. Again, I'm looking at it from the gambling industry's perspective. So as you will know, Colombia, regulated back in 1617. It's based on the Spanish regulation, a very solid market, I suppose, could be a little on the tough end for any newcomers, but still, the market's been going strong for 8-9 years by now. So we got to give them, hopefully this won't sound too patronizing, I would personally give them a lot of kudos and credit for that. Peru has recently regulated, a country of some 40 million people. So that could be an interesting opportunity. And again, I'm not saying that with all due respect, the Peru market could rival with some of the bigger markets in the region or even on the global scene. But said that, I believe nowadays, as you put it, Zoltan, the industry is on the lookout for new horizons. So that could be an interesting opportunity. Chile's been trying to regulate its market for some time. They haven't quite gotten there yet, but I have every confidence that they will. And then ultimately, now there are the Paraguays, Argentinas of this world. The Argentinian regulation is little convoluted and perhaps difficult to unpack, but there are certainly operators that have done really well in Buenos Aires and a few of the other provinces. And ultimately, sticking to the spirit of stories, as you will know, sports, but in particular football, or for American audience, I'm not a big fan of that word, soccer is the absolute passion of all Latin Americans and, of course, beyond. Just as a sidebar, sadly, today, I'm sure the whole world found out that Diogo Jota, the Liverpool player, tragically passed away. So we're filming on the day, and I woke up to that news. That was very, very sad. But the reason I'm bringing this up is to demonstrate the love and the passion this region has, and of course, he was Portuguese, but this region has for football and football players. And that permeates their approach to life, that permeates their approach to business. And of course, to once again come full circle, that needs to be reflected in the market and marketing strategies of the gambling operators. Perhaps very briefly, one final story, because I keep blubbering about the power of football as a Palmeiras fan these days, and they'll be up against Chelsea tomorrow night. It will be at the Club World Cup, fingers crossed, because if they win, they'll come back here to New Jersey for their next game. I had the distinct privilege to be at their latest semi-final game, the Copa Libertadores against Boca Juniors back in 23. And sadly, Palmeiras lost on penalties and did not advance. I can guarantee that was when it really dawned on me with its full force. I can guarantee you that I had never, ever seen this many, and I was borderline in tears as a decent Palmeiras fan. I had never, ever seen this many grown men crying inconsolably in the arms of their girlfriends, wives, loved ones, partners. So that's what football means.
Yes.
To the Brazilians and many others in Latin America and, of course, around the world. So I believe the reason I keep bringing up this point is that I would put it at the very top for anyone's list when thinking about that region. It's not just business, as the absolute love for that sport that plays a huge role.
Yeah, and you get to see them next year, all the stars in the world at the World Cup in the US.
Yeah, that is certainly the plan. We shall see whether we'll be prepared to travel up and down the country to perhaps follow a Seleção, the Brazilian national team. I'm not holding my breath that the Czech Republic would qualify, although I wish them the best of luck. But indeed, this tournament, needless to say, is a bit of a dry run for the next year's World Cup.
All right, so you have your legal background in both EU countries, many of the jurisdiction, and the UK system. So how do you feel about the fragmented state-by-state US model? Do you think federal level oversight is a realistic future? Because I know that in last week, 2 weeks ago, when we were hosting the US market update, Bill Pascal was very, very pronounced about having this type of overview.
Yeah, well, Bill, as I recall, would have been incensed, if not incandescent, about that. And I would give him a lot of credit for that position, because as you know, and as you will recall, the individual states have fought extremely hard for the right to be allowed to regulate sports betting. And my, these days, home state, New Jersey, nothing to do with me, but a lot to do with Bill and many of his colleagues, and many of our colleagues and friends. They did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of, if you pardon the pun, lifting the lid of PASPA and having it revoked and removed by the United States Supreme Court. I suppose that's a convoluted and long-winded way of saying that I believe that the states have done an excellent job when it comes to regulating the space. And as they say, don't fix it if it ain't broken. I suppose when it comes to the federal level, that, to your points, getting more and more involved via the likes of CFTC, on the prediction market side of things. And there have been a few bills dropped in the federal Congress, especially around market and sports integrity and responsible gambling. Long story short, I believe that the states are best placed to regulate both sports betting and online casino, and they've proven it to everyone. If there is a role, again, brushing aside for the sake of the argument, the prediction markets that by nature are regulated on the federal level, if there's a role for the federal governments, it would be, I suppose, in light of President Trump's budget, that might be rather difficult. But the role would be in terms of perhaps securing additional funds for treatment and even prevention of gambling addiction. And of course, besides that, the federal authorities, just like the state authorities, tend to have lots of dealings, especially with the big leagues, but across the sports space, including the likes of NCAA and college sports. Of course, a big thing, going back to a cultural shock. College sports, huge thing in the US, largely, I was going to say non-existent, that wouldn't be fair, but not as much hype in Europe. But then I'm going off tangent. So in terms of the role for the federal government, I think I would suggest that the federal government may want to focus on beefing up or even creating medical and prevention programs that would complement and support the prevention programs regarding gambling addiction that the individual states have already been putting in place.
All right. So yeah, this actually leads us to part 2 of our podcast today, because we are going to talk about responsible gambling, which we actually just launched a tool on our websites, on our gaming websites, where you can assess yourself. There are 10 questions to find out if you need treatment or not. This is based on scientific databases, and it actually also gives you the opportunity to find the closest help. We will be working on this tool even further. But yeah, Martin, you've been deeply involved in responsible gambling initiatives worldwide. So do you find the public attitude towards RG differ significantly between the US, Europe, and LATAM?
First of all, let me commend you, at the risk of sounding patronizing yet again, on putting that tool on your website. I think I've taken a look, and I think it's very, very good and very useful.
Yeah, we're still working. We're still working on filtering out some of the stuff, but yeah, it's a beginning.
Yeah, and certainly having in the right direction. To answer your question, I suppose the starting point in my book would be the fact that, with all due respect to the US markets, and some of them are quite mature by now, but on the whole, the European markets still tend to be more mature regarding regulation. So, of course, they have a little bit of a head start, because the trajectory tends to be quite similar. Get the space regulated, bring the serious operators in, try, and I suppose we could be talking about all the black market issues ad nauseum and may not have the time, but take efficient action against the fly-by-night operators that are not prepared to play it by the book, while, of course, having instituted the responsible gambling and wider consumer protection programs. But in function of the market maturing, this is what we've, as an industry, experienced in Europe, and ever increasingly so here in the United States and elsewhere. In the Americas, the responsible gambling programs are getting more and more sophisticated, because it's in function of a couple of factors, I would suggest. So the overall situation within the marketplace, the political situation, i.e., to put it bluntly in human speak, public raising hue and cry. And of course, the other critical factor I would suggest is the media and to what extent, for want of better expression, they would have been after the industry regarding the protections they have put in place. So, and this is the bottom line. I strongly believe that throughout the industry, regardless of the jurisdiction, we have embraced responsible gambling as a critical element of what we do, the critical factor that will assure the long-term sustainability of this industry. We all have sets of tools, both practical tools and educational, informational tools, excuse me, that we offer to our customers. That, and it may never change, it's still work in progress. And what do I mean by that? In my book, it's about finding the balance between affording players the highest possible level of protection without impinging on the ability of the gambling business to thrive.
Yeah.
So, absolute commitment to provide customers, or to use the Americanism, patrons, with the information they need, education tools they need to decide and determine how to gamble reasonably and safely, provide them with tools that allow them to determine how much they want to spend or whether they want to be on the side at all, assuming that they've already registered. So I'm, of course, talking self-exclusion, other forms of curfews. But what I believe, 2 final points, hasn't worked that well, if at all, are statutorily imposed limits. Because in my view, the responsible gambling tools, and it's no mean feat, and it's a tall order, granted, but they need to be as individualized, as reflecting of the individual's position, including his or her financial means, as possible. So that is the first point. Just leave there some room, even a lot of room for maneuver for both the operators and the customers. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there would disagree with me, but I remain of the view that the customers have a big role to play here, customers themselves, and they also carry part of that onus, part of the burden to do the right thing and behave responsibly. Yes, it's on us to create that ecosystem that would allow them to do that would even encourage and incentivize them to do that. And one final point, because that's always been one of the hot button issues for many, many years, advertising.
Yeah.
Blanket bans of anything, especially advertising, including gambling-related advertising, have, in my book, proven themselves to be counterproductive. They induce lots of folks to march away into the black market. So in the same vein, so that would be the mantra, do everything within reason. I think advertising has 2 key powers. If advertising was a superhero, those are the powers. One, inform the population at large who are the good guys, for want of better expression, the legitimate license operators, and distinguish them from the fly-by-night ones. Secondly, it also is just the perfect avenue to convey the critical responsible gambling messages. And as I might have said on the quarterly talks we do with Bill and Jeremy, I'm a big fan of crazy adverts. Nothing wrong with that. I have a laugh. But it's good if those crazy adverts, the mischievous elements, are combined with the serious stuff. So messages around responsible gambling, and also making sure, that's the final point I promise, that the adverts are not misleading. If I'm offering free bets, they better be free. If they're free, that's fine. If they're not free, well, that's misleading advertising. So all in all, I believe the industry has gone a really long way towards achieving that ultimate goal of creating a safe and responsible environment. But within that environment, we still have work to do on both ends of the pond and even beyond.
Yeah. It's especially when the legislator and regulators are not up to speed with all these initiatives and are not interested in hearing them. Especially now in Romania, is the case with the these, like you said, blanket advertising ban. They're starting to go the way that Poland has gone, to start banning sports ambassadors being involved in advertisement on Facebook and TikTok and anywhere else. So yeah, it's crazy. Not to mention, of course, the increased taxes that they are now going to impinge. So yeah, it's going to be crazy here.
Yeah,
but yeah,
if I may,
that's what you get.
Exactly. Sorry to cut across. 2 points on that. Sadly, and these days that's seems to be the case here in the States and down in Brazil. Gambling, as it's always been, is a low-hanging fruit, in particular as regards taxation. Oh, well, that's not going to lose me an election if I put the tax rate, or if I put up the taxes on gambling, perhaps with the notable exception of the great state of Nevada. That's one. And two, to your other point, and I'm by no means trying to snipe at the industry. And of course, I consider the two of us part of the industry. So I would be, technically speaking, sniping at myself as well. I suppose we still need to get even better at shouting about the good stuff that we've done. Let's not be shy. Let's be prepared to admit that not everything would have gone as we would have hoped it would have gone. But to your point, and I agree, I might be biased, but there's lots of good that's been produced by this industry, even going beyond creating jobs, sponsorships, and whatnot. We've got pretty robust RG, sports integrity, but also charity programs. So we shouldn't be shy to talk about them.
Yeah, let's talk about them, because you've been on part of some of the boards, like the Entain Foundation in the US, the AGA. So what's one RG initiative you're particularly proud of that you helped shape?
The one I am particularly proud of is the NCAA, i.e., as you well know, the organization that runs college sports here in the United States. So for many a year, I supported. Apologies, I got an incoming call. I supported Epic. They used to be called Epic Risk Management. These days, they're called Epic Global Solutions in their US ventures, and to some extent beyond. And together, we've landed a partnership, although for the record, Epic Global Solutions has always been the partner to NCAA, whereas the Entain Foundation US provided the funding for the program. The reason I'm setting this out is the fact that NCAA has for very good reasons, very strict rules as to with who could call himself or herself a partner to NCAA. Anyway, this is the program that I'm particularly proud of, that I have been involved with, because as part of that program, Epic Global Solutions have provided training that revolves around their lived experience with gambling addiction to by now dozens, definitely over 100, if not a couple of 100 colleges up and down the United States. And I believe that a training like this is absolutely critical, both for the college community, and I should also, besides Bob, give a shout out to Mark Hicks at the NCAA, who's been involved with the project throughout, together with a few others. It's absolutely critical for both the college community and the gambling industry to engage and find a way of educating college students, including college athletes, about the vagaries of betting without grooming them, without incentivizing them to play. If one day they do choose to bet, once their careers are over, ideally, then they will know how to do it. And they will be cognizant and aware of the risks. And I believe that would be a great outcome that ultimately would make the whole US gambling space an even better place.
All right. So not many platforms in our industry, and of course, those who are doing conferences or podcasts have this habit, like we do, that we like to give shout outs to our competitors. But we know that you are hosting a podcast, the Safe Bet Show at SBC, and congratulations for that, and congratulations, of course, for the team SBC. So this podcast has featured everyone from sports stars to regulators. So what's been your most surprising or maybe personally meaningful interview so far, and maybe some point out why?
Well, first of all, I haven't had you on that podcast yet, so I will need to redeem myself and fix that. Secondly, thank you for your very kind words. And in terms of the highlights, if you will, or an occurrence that would have happened on that podcast that's been the closest to my heart, it's lots of the personal stories. We've had the likes of Amani Tuma, former New York Giant, who shared his life story rather. Just recently at the Canadian Gaming Summit, Nick Kyprios came on, a former NHL player who, I think that gave that podcast two factors that gave the podcast a particular dynamic. One, he used to score lots of goals in his junior years, but then arguably not so many during his NHL days. So he had to revamp his game, and he turned himself into an enforcer. And on the back of it, sadly, he had to retire because of post-concussion syndrome. And besides that, we've had great people up and down this industry who are prepared to come on and share their personal stories. We talked about Paul Buck on this podcast. His personal story is pretty powerful, beyond powerful, even so. And it, I suppose, takes some courage. Of course, he wasn't doing it for the first time, but pluck up the courage and go and tell the story. So the bottom line is that I'm really trying for the podcast to revolve around and focus on the guest and his or her story within, but also outside of gambling, and including some of the rather rough patches that they might have grappled with, because then I would hope that can speak right to the heart of the audience. Okay, look at this person. Now, an amazing career in the gambling industry, but also, and I'm deliberately now not naming any names, but some sensitivities and fragilities, if you will. So I believe these are very, very powerful stories.
All right. You also have esports regulation on the radar, as we know. So what's one of the legal or ethical challenge in that particular space that most of the industry still underestimates?
I don't think that the industry would underestimate it. I should make that clear. But a particular challenge in my book associated with esports and betting on esports is that a lot of the young and younger people tend to be if you pardon the pun, the whiz kids of that space. So out in Europe, Korea, even here in the States, the best players of, let's say, something I would have played many, many years ago before having a family, especially like StarCraft or the Dotas and League of Legends of this world. They could be 13, 14. So that, I believe, is a particular challenge that needs, and is, of course, by the esports themselves being addressed on the integrity side of things. But then, of course, that has an interplay and interaction with the responsible gambling approach that the gambling industry has needed to adopt to this particular category of gambling market.
All right. So I know you're still young. I keep asking people this
Am
question
I?
nowadays on our podcast, but you have so many hats, right? So you're legal, like you're working in advisory, like podcast host, board member at several boards. So how do you decide what's worth your time and energy these days?
Oh, I suppose that will sound like a broken record, if of course revolves a lot around my family. At the same time, one has to work every now and then to pay the bills
Yeah.
and bring home the bacon, as they said, only figurative, or sometimes even literally speaking. To answer your question, finally, I've always tried to do what I believe would have furthered the interest of the business I would have been with at a particular point, but also ultimately the industry. And it's always been quite an honor to serve on those boards. So long-winded way of saying that I'm just trying to squeeze everything in, but should I start feeling that I wouldn't be giving some of those roles my all, then I would rather be honest and upfront about that, and with apologies and regrets let the organization know that I would be grateful if they look for someone else to come in and spend the energy any such role requires that I couldn't anymore.
All right. If you could pass one safe bet, piece of advice to the next generation of leaders in our industry, what would it be, and why does it matter now more than ever?
So, as I might have said, I've become almost a borderline fanatical Palmeiras fan. And as you might know, Abel Ferreira is Palmeiras team manager, the most successful one they've ever had. And he's written a book, and he called the book, he used his mantra, which is Cabeça Fria, Coração Quente. So I would apply that, and give me a second, of course, translate it, but I would apply that to the gambling industry. So you need to be really cool in your head, but give it all the passion from the heart you've got. And I believe that's the way to go about one's own betting, play within reason, but it's also an approach that the industry, and a lot of folks in the industry have deployed that approach. Do everything very measured, but at the same time be passionate about what you do.
All right, that sounds very good, and actually, this could tie to our surprise thing we are launching this time with this episode. You know that we have guests from all around, from artificial intelligence, blockchain, fintech, gambling, and yeah, we want to start this type of messaging. And at the end of these new podcast episodes, we would love for you to leave a short message to the next guest. This just like think about it, one or two sentences, keep it authentic, and don't worry because you don't know who the next guest is.
I was going
So
to
this
ask.
is like, yeah, this is like a casual handoff. You can offer a piece of advice or challenge something in life.
Now I won't be as big and big-headed to offer a piece of advice, but to the person that will step into my shoes here, I would say two things. And I mean it's an absolute pleasure to chat with you, Zoltan. So they should be grateful for that invitation. And then the second message is it's a great opportunity to talk about what you do, because I'm sure that you wouldn't have been invited, whoever you are, unless you felt very passionate about what you do. So I'm sure that will be shining through the next episode that Zoltan will film with you. And hopefully we'll get to meet one day.
All right, this is great. This is and think about it. You were the first one to do it.
That's an honor. Thank you very much
All
for
right.
that. And I wish you the best of luck with the new set of podcasts and the new approach.
All right. Thank you so much. And yeah, because we do have 2,000 listeners out there and only about 10, 15% of those subscribe, make sure to subscribe, guys, because you've been missing out on lots of notification. Martin, thank you so much for your time. And I wish you all the best. And we will probably see each other online again in 3 months for the next quarterly meetup. So
it will be my absolute
care.
pleasure. Thanks again for having me. Take very good care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for this section of Hipther Talks. Thank you for being a part of our journey today. Don't forget to tune in next week for more insights and discussions. Stay connected with us on Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. Until then, keep exploring and keep growing. We'll see you next time.